everyone. This is Trip, and returning to Homebrewed Christianity is Grace G. Sun Kim, and I'm just thrilled to get to talk to you again, Grace.
Oh, well, I'm so excited to be here with you. You are so amazing. So thank you so much for having me on and inviting me to so many of your forthcoming activities. So thank you, Trip.
Oh, well, I'm excited. And for all of you listening, when you get done having fun with this episode, say to yourself, you know what I want to do? I want to hang out with Grace and a bunch of other theology nerds. You can come to Theology Beer Camp. When you go to sign up, you should use Grace's code. And Grace, what is your code?
My code is MADANG, MADANG. It's the name of my podcast. So MADANG Podcast.
Oh.
So use that code and come. I would love to meet you all. This will be my first beer camp with you, Trip. So I'm so excited to see you and all your guests and all the amazing people that have signed up thus far. So I am very excited.
Yeah, well, I'm surprised. I mean, you haven't been invited to other people's theology beer camps?
Are there other
No, I don't know.
No, I'm just surprised that you never invited me before to your other previous ones.
Well, this is, I guess, the fifth or sixth. I can't remember.
Already?
But
yeah, because you know what? I've been sharing it and people said, oh, they can't come to this one, but they came to your previous one and that it was excellent.
well,
So I'm like, I'm sad you never invited me.
well, hopefully I can make up for my previous failures.
Okay. Oh, that's
and maybe we'll still be friends at the end of it.
Oh yeah, we'll be best. Yeah, we'll be best buddies. We'll be our podcast buddies.
Oh, the real question, Grace.
Huh?
What are you saying?
No, I was going to say thank you always for sponsoring my podcast, Madang. You are such a wonderful friend, a podcaster, and you've been supportive of my work. And I just love everything that you do. You're like a magic wand. You just go, or a genie, and just go bang, and everything turns out so good.
Well, I'm glad someone thinks that about me.
You know what I mean?
Yes. Well, yeah, your podcast is wonderful. No, I'm not gonna. Why would I edit out compliments, Grace?
Yes.
Look, I take all I can get. I might even cut them out just to hand them to family members. Say, look, Grace said I'm a genie.
Oh, okay, yeah, do that.
No, I got a magic wand.
You are a genie. No, you do everything so well. You teach the world so many good things. So thank you. And thank you for teaching me so many great things too. So thank you, Trip.
Well, we're going to have fun. Everyone should definitely go check out your podcast. And I had multiple of the members of the Homebrewed community have said that when you interviewed me, it was tons of fun. And they were like, wow, she got you talking, saying stuff you don't normally do if you're just, interviewing someone. So
actually, you were so good. And, my podcast, like yours, goes on multiple platforms. On YouTube, the most watched is with Chris Hedges. But on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, you are the most listened to. So I'm so excited that you are the most listened to in the audio side of my podcast. Well, people love you, Trip.
They just can't bear to look at me. They're like, whoa, let me get over to the audio version.
No, I don't think that's the reason why, Trip. You are such a good-looking dude. So I don't think that's the reason. I just think Chris Hedges is so big on YouTube.
Yeah.
That he just pops up everywhere. So my podcast just keeps popping up where he's popping up. But you are so big as a podcaster that I think just on the audio side, yours keeps popping up. So you are the most listened to. So I'm just thrilled. And you were so good on my podcast. And you were one of the first ones, I think, first guests. So it was so much fun having you, Trip.
Well, it was easy to get me to say yes. So we got sent a bunch of questions, and so I'm gonna we talked which ones you'd be interested in talking about. So I'll ask them, and you can decide after I read it, since I'll be picking the order, if you want me to say something first or you want to, and then we'll talk a little bit about it, and then we'll go to the next one.
Okay, sounds good.
And because one of the things people will happen at beer camp, there'll be these theologians giving their polished talks for the people, but lots of it is built on interaction, where people that comes questions shape the conversation that's there. There'll be 15 other podcasters there asking questions, and I find that the conversational kind of questing right after the divine to be much more powerful these
Yeah.
days than
I think it'd be so
a
rich. That's
monologue.
gonna be so exciting because some of your guests I know, and the other guests I don't know. So it'd be really exciting to engage with them, and of course, engage with you, Trip, to discuss because this is all on God. So I think this will be very, very exciting.
All right, so we're going to go with Amy's question first. And you are a theologian, so I'm sure you have a perfect rehearsed answer for this one, Grace. Amy asked, I've been wondering about why bother about theology. I mean, most people I know, including family and friends, even seem to have never heard of the word theology. People engage in politics, economics, physics, which makes sense since they help us shape the world we live for better or worse. Here's what I want to hear. What do we miss if there was no theology? Why do we need theology? What would a world without theology be like?
Wow,
Oh,
that's a really deep question. She must be a seminary student. But anyway, Trip, did you want to say something first?
I see what's happening. No, well, so I guess initially I would just say so much depends on how you understand what theology is.
Mhm.
And one of the things is that human beings organize their world and reality based on their deepest values and commitments, seen and unseen. Right. So currently, our world is structured by, in many ways, the theology of mammon. That our world is structured around the power that the economic system shapes us. And so, like, theology in some sense is reflection on the whatever logic dominates a society. Yes, it was birthed in some sense in Christendom as we thought about the church being the primary symbolic structure for thinking. But I think theology is a way of understanding the organizing logic of a society. And then, as inheritors of the prophetic Jewish tradition, the ministry of Jesus, one of the tasks of the faithful is to be a prophetic critic of whatever the dominating ideology is. So, and prophets hold the dominating logic to account on behalf of justice, care of neighbor and orphan and widow, and our non-human neighbors at this point in an ecological crisis. So I think a world without theology would not be a very human one in the sense that everyone has a deep allegiance to something. But a theologian at their best, and anyone wrestling theologically, is one that starts to look at the way idol worship plays out, be it the idolatry of the market, of nationalism, of all the other isms. So I think that, like, the case for doing theology well is, well, we always already are doing it. So let's be thoughtful, critical, and hopefully become more faithful to the way of Jesus because we did it. So that's my
Yeah.
attempt to self-justify 1,500 podcast episodes about theology.
Trip, you were so funny. Yeah, 1,500 episodes.
There's a lot of me. So if I was against theology, it would be like the end of Aquinas. I go mute.
Before I get into the answer, I must say I only have 20 episodes, and my first ever podcast interview was on your homebrewed Christianity. But anyway, you gave such a serious answer to this question, and I should be a little bit serious. But before I get serious, I would just wanted to say theology is important. Otherwise, I wouldn't have a job. I wouldn't have a teaching position. And so theology is vital and it's very, very important. I've had, just to give a little bit a background of who I am, when I was, toying with what I should do with my PhD, I thought I'll just do Christian education. I don't know why. I just was interested in Christian education. And then my pastor, who's been a mentor for me, said, why would you want to do Christian education? It's so boring. And then I thought about it, and this is nothing against Christian educators because I think, they're vital for our education in the church and in the seminary, etc. Then I thought about it. I thought, oh, maybe he may be right. He said, do something exciting. So the exciting thing I stumbled on was theology. So theology is important. And I think, I agree with everything that you said, Trip. It helps us to understand and make sense of the world. A lot of these long words, theology is from the Greek word theos, which means God, and logy, like any other word, like biology, chemistry, is the study of. So theology is important, especially for us Christians, but then for other people of different spiritualities, or those who are wondering, about their own life or how this world came to be. Theology is the study of God. So we want to make sense of, what is our place, what is our calling, what is our role, what are we supposed to do with our life? Our life, in one sense, is very short. In one sense, it's very long. And so we want to ask these questions. And so these are all kind of theological questions. And so even in my intro to theology class, one of the assignments, a very short one, is do a theological reflection. And, many people think they've never done this, but I think even Amy, you must, when we think about certain things as you're walking down the street, or when you're drinking your coffee and you're reflecting, a lot of it is this theological reflection. It just, we aren't kind of naming it that, but you can drink a cup of tea like I have, and these ethical questions: where did the tea leaves come from, or where is the coffee coming from that you are drinking from? Are you going to use a reusable cup? These things, as you reflect, these are all theological questions, theological ethical questions that you reflect on every day. And I have a church historian friend who said, you theologians make everything up. He said, us church historians, we have church documents, biblical scholars use Bible, and, practical theologians, they use, other practical documents, but you theologians make everything up. And, in one way, I may say, in a small way, we do make things up, but not in the sense of making them up out of nowhere. We do rely on church documents. We do rely on the Bible and other sources. And so theology is this huge area of discipline that tries to make sense of the world, of the science, of dinosaurs, of climate change. It asks big questions. And I think, recently in seminary training or so forth, theology and philosophy have been more separated. But when we look at church history, much of it was intertwined. So philosophy, some will say, oh, why do we need philosophy? It's a waste of our time, waste of our energy. Why study that in our undergrad? But we need these philosophers. And so in the same way, theologians hopefully will help you in understanding and making sense of the world, understanding how we read scripture, because bad theology can kill, can cause, climate injustice, all these negative things. So we do want good theology, and we want theologians so that I will continue to have a job in my life, have a little source of income.
Well, I am, yeah, I think that there's a sense of the feeling that you hear in Amy's question of like why do this? Really, sometimes you get that kind of exhaustion because a group, some person has some very narrow theology. They think every Christian has to believe this, and then beat people over the heads with it. You're like, why do I want to do that?
Yeah.
But one of the things that you point out in so much of your work, say like the intersectional, looking at intersectional theology, or when you explored your own story, are the ways in which the unchallenged assumptions in a lot of theology lead to kind of death dealing impacts.
Yes,
The way
yes.
like different hierarchy, patriarchy, all these types of things are preserved, and like a change of an economic platform or an understanding of physics doesn't reorient a person's relationship to their neighbor, an enemy, and such that you bring to consciousness participation in systemic evil or something, and then seek to address it and that kind of thing. So I feel like when theology becomes the label you put on narrow, shitty ideas, and then you're like, oh, why do we need that? If it's the kind of invitation to the kind of analysis that you've spent so much time doing, then it, like, who wouldn't want to do it? Like, do you not want a more thriving world? Like,
yeah, we want a flourishing world. And, part of Amy's question is, I mean, most people I know, including family, seems to not have even heard of the word. And I think she may be right. I just had a doctor's appointment and they always ask, what do you do? When I'm on a plane or something, the next person next to you asks you. And I'm always thinking half of them probably don't know what I do, but they will just pretend to think that they know what I'm doing. So I'm always cautious and I always have to say, oh, like religious studies, etc. But I think, when we even think about religion, the study of religion, we think it's not that important. But when we think about how it is intertwined, so Tripp, earlier you mentioned about intersectional, and I co-wrote the book Intersectional Theology with Susan Shaw, which you had both of us on, or maybe separately. I couldn't remember because there was so much problem
we did both.
trying to track us down at the same time. So it might have been separate. But when we think about religion and we think, all these religious studies departments are closing down because there's no funding. So even in the undergrad program and even, in the high school level, they're all shutting down. But religion is so important because when you think about it, it impacts our politics, our election, how we think about abortion, how we think about this environmental crisis. Religion, whatever religion that you belong to or have affinity or have a faith, and there is this deep impact. So theology in the same way, some people think theology and religious studies is similar. There is a lot of overlap. We try to make sense of God's presence or how we understand God's presence in all these interactions, and it informs how we vote, how we live every day, how we think about abortion issues and queer theology. It is this really, really big, broad thing. So even though people may not have heard of the word theology or understand the discipline of theology, it really does impact our life almost every day. Mm-hmm. So it is a very important discipline. And I'm just grateful to be able to do this with my life.
All right. So now we're going to go with Damien's question here. It's so hard to put into words. If God exists, is he loving? Does he answer prayer? Is he an interventionist God? I've seen and experienced what seems to be so, but I also have seen the opposite. So much of my faith has been deconstructed, and things I have believed in the past now feel cringeworthy and sometimes shameful. I'm not sure what is truth in the Bible anymore and what is myth and allegory. The reconstruction of faith always escapes me.
Wow, that's a very deep question. These are excellent questions. Tripp, I don't know if you want to say something first.
Well, I mean, I guess my initial response is it's always important to remember that when we use the word God, it's a concept. It is an idea, and even if people are all using the word God in the same room, they don't always entail the same thing. And I think one of the challenges for people like Damon here, who's struggling with having had an idea that doesn't work and it doesn't always cohere, is then to go, how do I still relate to the divine while I haven't come to a new homeostasis, in a sense, of how I understand the divine? And when you're in those kind of liminal spaces, I think to put a demand on yourself that you figure everything out, get it clear and final, so you can box it up and hold on to it tight, it's just not healthy. And give yourself grace and permission to wrestle and reflect. And the other thing I would say is, when you use the word truth, it's much like God, right? Like some of the way he frames the question. Truth seems set against myth and allegory. And I would just say there are plenty of things myths and allegories can get at that like a direct, empirically organized, objective statement doesn't get. And that's why Jesus told parables. It's not like he didn't tell the parable of the Good Samaritan because he was really concerned about the violence a particular day on the way, on the road, right? Like the story was an answer to the question, who is my neighbor? And you don't go, well, I don't know. What was the guy's name that got beat up, Jesus? And what day was it? Do we have a police report to verify this? If a camera was there, did it happen? Right. So I think when especially more conservative expressions and parts of the church got jealous of the kind of confidence that are more scientifically minded people had, they then thought, this is what truth is, let's imitate it and assert ours. And that leads to dismissing the power of allegory or metaphor or myths and things. Those aren't less true. They're different tonalities of truth. And if you make space to engage those, then maybe Damien will have less anxiety in that process and can attend more to the presence of God through it.
Yeah.
At least that's my intuition, at least for
yeah.
It's always weird answering a question that's personal when you don't see the person. So
I know,
Damien, if
and
you're
I don't know
completely
who.
wrong,
Yeah, maybe you know who this person is too, but
no.
okay, you don't. Yeah, but I think this is, these questions are, they are personal, but I feel they are like very universal. So many people have these similar questions. So, if God exists, I think, I think we are finite beings and we're trying to understand the infinite, which is very, very difficult with our peanut-sized brain. We're so tiny. And, Tripp, you mentioned, sometimes we love to box up God and present it. I think, and when we look at the Old Testament, it says, do not create God in your own image or something like that. I can't think biblically at this moment. But the thing is, all throughout church history, what Christians have done, we have created God in our own image. And that's why we have this masculine God. And so I think it's really, really, it's a struggle. It's an ongoing struggle. So if Damien is going through this struggle, it's a struggle that I go through all the time, trying to deconstruct and reconstruct, trying to make a sense of God who is invisible, who we can't see, but much like many of us before, we do it by faith. And I have my book behind me, which was Invisible, right behind me. That was one of my latest books. And there I do end the book with a theology of visibility. I begin with the problem that so many people in our society, particularly Asian Americans, are made invisible, but we're not the only ones. And so, the problems of it. I don't want to go into too much detail, but I do want to end with the theology of visibility, that those who feel marginalized, oppressed, or thrown aside in society, like queer or disabled, and all the other people that you may find yourself in, that we do believe in this invisible God who then makes us visible. And as we become visible in a different way, we get to see God in the lives of others, in each other. So this invisible God becomes a visible God as we witness God's presence and God's way of healing and bringing the world together. I believe it was Augustine who said, if you think that is God, then that is not God. Once you think you have figured out who God is, that isn't, because we are so finite. We can't figure it out. But as theologians, I'm a kind of a, I don't know, professional or a paid theologian. But I think, in Latin American theology and liberation theology, we say everybody's a theologian. Everybody studies God, wants to know who God is, tries to get closer to God. So if we are all theologians and we're on this theological journey, sometimes it's very difficult because the God that we were presented during our childhood, which was for me a white old man, doesn't seem like the God of my life today as an older woman, without disclosing my age, but I do have older kids, way older than Tripp's kids. So, we go on this theological journey and we may never be able to figure it out. And it gets difficult, but I think we don't just throw up our arms and say it's too difficult, but we still try, because it deepens our lives. It helps us make sense of our own life and gives reason for life and makes our life richer and flourishing. So I'm not quite sure if I answered Damien's question, but that's my best attempt at answering his question.
One follow-up I think that might be helpful is you've shared in a number of your books, like your own struggles with particular theological ideas that were handed on to you. And, in some sense, since you are a professional theologian and teach it, like being embarrassed in some, or finding cringeworthy ideas you were handed, like you've testified to having the same thoughts Damien has, and as someone who's further along, having written beautiful constructive theology, when you look back at those times, going like, I have encountered God in the life of the church, and I've also encountered patriarchy and normativity in ways that aren't helpful to the flourishing of my being and those around me. Like, how did you find or trust the presence and spirit of God while also, shaking the dust off the feet, off your feet in patriarchy's door of sorts?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I address it in a lot of my books, Embracing the Other and Invisible and Hope in Disarray. I think, I grew up in this conservative evangelical family and church. My dad is still part of that. He'll often call me and ask where I am. And then if I'm in a different country, he'll say, these people waste so much money on you, flying you around, and you convert nobody. You don't bring anybody to God. So he always complains about things like that. So that's kind of still the context, my family is, or the extended family is immersed in. So it's very difficult. But when you are kind of exposed to that cringeworthy kind of theology, or understanding of God, and you realize that it is oppressive, once you recognize how oppressive it is, you have to ask yourself, is this really God, or a God created in the image of the oppressor? So, Mary Daly, a feminist theologian who taught, I believe, at Boston College, said, if God is male, then the male is God, or the other way around. So, we wonder, because God, all throughout scripture, keeps saying that God is a liberator. God loves those marginalized, the foreigners, the foreign woman, the lepers, bringing life and freedom to prisoners. Jesus engages with women, that was kind of unheard of at that time. He eats with them, he eats with the sinners, all these things. And if you keep preaching or teaching or writing about a God who is a white male and is oppressive and is a little racist and a sexist, then you have to question, the God that I had been worshiping or teaching about in churches or in seminary or writing about, is that the God of liberation? Is that the God of love? Is that the God who gives life? And if it isn't, you must question and deconstruct and rebuild your understanding of God. There's a lot of other people besides me who explore these topics and write about it. So you can read some of those books, listen to other podcasts, listen to more of Tripp's podcasts. I think, there's so many, and it's a very difficult path, and it may make you stumble along the way, but I think it will make you stronger.
Thanks, Grace. I I love getting to hear you share bits of your story, and definitely, Damien, you can go check out her books where you're very vulnerable and invisible, very vulnerable in ways
Oh my
that
gosh.
I was like, wow.
You know what, Trip? I don't know if I shared it in the last Invisible when you interviewed me, but I was really sick when I wrote it. And then so I put it aside. And then when I came back to it and the copy editor sent me the manuscript, I couldn't believe I shared some of the stories. And I debated so long, should I include them? Because I was so vulnerable. But I thought there was a few I really wanted to take out because I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm sharing these. But I thought if I don't share it, it may not make sense to the reader. Like it's not going to flow. And then on top of it, half the book will be gone too. So I had to keep it in. But yeah, I still, it's out there. So it's like no turning back. So I don't look at it again and worry. But in the middle of it, I worried a lot. First, I can't believe I wrote all that into the book and then struggling with whether to keep it or not.
Well, I mean, you mentioned, and I'm sure others have had these criticisms from family members that don't understand where you get, you're going around and you don't bring people to God. But just knowing I mean, just me and plenty of other people, I'm sure, have had this experience meeting you, reading you, and encountering your work. If it wasn't for the kind of constructive work that you do, we definitely wouldn't be hanging out with God. So maybe you aren't leading people to jump down an aisle and go through some spiritual laws, but when it goes to helping people who have encountered the divine understand the God beautiful enough to give your life to, then I think you're not just gifted at it, you've done it. So
thank you, Trip. Oh my goodness.
I mean, I think people sometimes people only understand like one part of the church's way of expressing bringing people to God, right? Like they never had walk the aisle invitations in the Catholic Church for a long time, and it was the only option, right? So the life of the church was sustained in a sacramental liturgical context. And in modernity, especially those that are riddled with the kind of rationality of the West, like having ethical desires and a picture of the divine that's set against it is so off-putting that the kind of evangelist we need is one with the gifts you have. So
thank you, Trip. It makes it all worth me being on this podcast with you today. Thank you. You know what? Sometimes I question, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing?
Well, I think so, but I mean, I'm biased, right? Like I think I'm a member of your fan club. So all right. So the last question we'll do is from Olivia, and this one is a fun one. The question, fun one. Okay, maybe a theologian thinks these are fun questions. I'm sure Olivia doesn't. But the question that bugs me the most and has done for a long time: why isn't God more discernible? Am I blind? Is it by design?
Yeah, that's a deep one. Okay, Trip, you want to go first?
Well, okay. Is it by design that God's not discernible? I think in some sense, genuine love requires freedom and reciprocity. So, like if God was like if we became robots because of the display of the divine presence, that kind of breaks the kind of reciprocal love. There's a long nerdy answer when it goes to just how the cognitive mechanisms that human beings use developed over time. And there's a different propensity for recognizing transcendence in however you want to, whether or not you believe in a God, based on your biology and the cultural context you're born in. So yeah, it does vary how sensitive someone is. But one of the reasons is I think God's not always discernible is really based on the way we've been formed. What are the liturgies that we get shaped by? And are growing up, there are certain liturgies connected to the excellence that's demanded of us if we are in nerdy families like Grace and I's. Liberal mainline Protestants are not sure you have to go to church every Sunday, but they are sure what your SAT scores and grades need to be, right? So, and what's that connected to? Ultimately, this kind of liturgical commitment to success and valorizing a kind of work ethic and all these kinds of things. And I always tell myself, which liturgy is more important, Trip? Well, when I'm painting, parenting and such, in the kind of what are we? Anyway, there's a lot of liturgies, but if I was struggling with God, discerning God, then I would think about what are the things you attend to, and how do you attend to the things of God? There are 3 places Jesus says he'll always be: at the table, in the neighbor, and in the care of the other. So if you go to those places and ask where God is, then you're starting to attend to the presence of the divine. The other things are, where do your affections go? This is if you look at most of the contemplative tradition and in the church, but also any of the contemplative traditions outside of it, the most powerful thing for forming the way you will, where you relate to the world, is where you move your affections, and what is it that you value and what you love. And those kinds of things can shift whether you can discern the presence of God over time. And like Jesus says to his disciples in the Sermon on the Mount, when you give, when you fast, when you pray, when you love, a lot of times people go, I don't know if God's around. I haven't experienced God. And then you ask them, like, when was the last time you fasted? Have you done serious practice of prayer? Like, do you actually give? Like, all these kinds of things. And it's like, no. And you go, well, maybe we should work on these. So I think that a lot of times people, when you're in one of those spaces where you go, WTF, God, where are you? And it's not like intense pain and trauma, but just like, well, I thought it would be easier. We have to recognize how many different parts of our lives don't want us attending to and awaken to the Spirit of God, because it's not helpful for most domination systems to have people attending to it. Mm-hmm. And the last thing I think that comes into it is like, no, sometimes we are blind, like, which is part of Olivia's question. Mm-hmm. But I don't think we have to be. But you don't get blind on accident. Mm-hmm. It happens. People, the systems you're in, like the impact of trauma in a religious context can blind people from spaces that help attune and connect them to the divine. You can be blinded because your economic system doesn't ever let you get to a space where you can have the deep enough breaths to reconnect with the divine. There's so many ways that blinding happens. And a lot of times we experience the burden of them, but not the but we aren't ultimately responsible for them. So it's one of those real complicated questions that, if you knew the person, I'd probably have like a more specific response. But yeah, anyway.
Yeah. Well, you said almost everything that I wanted to say. So I don't know if I have much more to add. I teach at Earlham School of Religion, and it's a Quaker school. And what they say is that of God in everyone. So if we can recognize God's presence, as you mentioned, in those 3 places, then we can see, then we're not so blind. In the Bible, Jesus heals the blind people, and we always say seeing is believing. So you see and you believe. I grew up with that Ripley's Believe It or Not show. Trip, you're younger than me, so I don't know if you know about Ripley's Believe It or Not, but there was a big show, and people did fantastic things, and you wouldn't know that they can do it until you saw it. And then when my kids were born, some people gave us books, the Ripley's Believe It or Not, big picture books. And so, we kind of grew up in that. But I think when we have faith, it's not so much seeing as believing, but believing is seeing. You believe and you see Christ in our neighbor. You see Christ in our enemies, and you are able to love. And so, going back to earlier when I said about God being infinite. We're these finite beings. And, theology, just to summarize everything that we've been saying, or what I've been saying, theology is important because it helps us make sense of the world and God's presence in the world. And so if we start to believe, we can see God, and we see God in each other, and we see the Spirit of God. And so much of my work has been in the last, 10 years have been on the Spirit. And so at the God Pod at the Theology Beer Camp, I'll do more on that. And I know Tripp and you and I will do a class on it. But I think really today it's so important to talk about the Spirit, God. And so I'll just end it there. I thank you to those who sent the questions. These are so exciting. And we'll talk more about that at the Theology Beer Camp. So I'm all excited about that.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you, Grace, for hanging out. It's always nice to get to see you. And I'm very much, I have a lot of anticipation for seeing each other in person after too many online engagements.
Yeah. And you were in Edinburgh, and I was there for a little bit, and we couldn't even see each other there. So I look forward to seeing you here in the States. So it'll be great. So hopefully more people will join us.
Oh, yeah. And remember, they can use your code and
MADANG. Yeah,
$50 off.
Yeah, 50. That's a lot of money these days. You can do a lot with $50.
Well, I'm looking forward to hanging out, and we'll see if I talk you into singing karaoke during.
No, you know what? I will do it. It's just I'm not good at it, but I will do it. I'll probably be dancing and singing up there. So if y'all want to see me, then please do come.
You know what? One of the best things.
Huh?
One of the best things about karaoke is success is based on your commitment, not your quality.
You know what? All Koreans love karaoke. I think it was invented in Korea. I don't know, but we have karaoke bars, and what are those? I don't know. We are all into it. It's just I'm not good at it. So when you ask me, but yeah, I'll do it. Just don't videotape me doing it. And tweet it out. That's the problem.
All right.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for having me, Tripp, and I'll see you soon.
Okay.